the idea behind the concept behind the mini globe race was to make ocean sailing and circumnavigation accessible for people that are maybe of average means, but above
Yep.
average ambition, what I like to say.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I thought, well, that's me.
Welcome to the Passages from the Heart podcast, a podcast made by an everyday sailor for everyday sailors. We talk everything from day sailing to racing to cruising to camping out on your boat and everything in between. It's time now to raise the sails. Welcome, sailors, back to the Passages from the Heart podcast. So what happens when average means are combined with above average ambition? Meet Josh Cayley, builder of his own 5.8 meter mini yacht, a sailing vessel he calls Skookum, and entrant in the inaugural 2025 Mini Globe Race, otherwise known as the MGR. I recently had the amazing opportunity to catch up with Josh as he is ramping up for departure of the second leg of the MGR, a 4,000 plus nautical mile passage from the west coast of Panama to the first pit stop in French Polynesia. So what is the MGR, you may wonder? In a nutshell, the Mini Globe Race, or MGR, is a race in which entrants will sail around the world west about in 5 legs via the traditional trade winds route in a home-built 5.8 meter sailboat. In this episode, Josh shares how he came to find his passion for sailing and how he discovered a fire in the belly to not only compete in a grueling around-the-world sailing race, but to take on the challenge of building his own 5.8 meter sailboat with which to compete in the MGR. Here is my interview with Josh Cayley.
Hi.
There we go.
Can you hear me okay?
Hello.
Hey.
I can, yeah. The connection's a
Yay.
little slow, so you have to bear with me.
No worries, no worries. It looks like it's a little bit blustery and cloudy there, huh?
Yeah, we're hoping that this wind will hold for us for because there's supposed to be no wind when we actually start. So
Oh, wow.
is
Yeah,
is
okay.
the audio okay?
Yeah, everything seems great. I'm using my laptop for the first time for Zoom. And normally I use my iPad, but I really like this setup a lot better than the iPad, but I'm kind of still learning my way around some of the features. So forgive me if I stumble here and there. um, Let me first welcome you to the Passages from the Heart podcast. I'm so excited that we were able to connect and that you had some time to sit here and chat with me before you take this leg 2 of the mini globe race journey.
Yeah. Sorry that it was a bit tricky getting connected, but I'm glad we finally did.
Yeah. Well,
We
I know your
worked out
time is
worked out the time difference.
yeah. Isn't that funny how that worked out where it was just I guess it's the whole daylight savings thing just sort of I didn't even think about how that could impact it, but it did. But here we are.
Yeah, it must have happened right then.
If you're willing to share, I always usually start the podcast off learning a little bit about how a sailor becomes a sailor. So I would love it if you could sort of talk to us about how you found sailing. I know you were a climber or are a climber, I think from the research that I did. So I'm kind of a little curious how we got into sailing.
Yeah, so I was a climber. I still am, at heart, but not so much as I used to. But uh my partner and I, we took a trip into the mountains, and I had done so much climbing all over the world, and I had kind of achieved the goals that I had wanted to, so I kind of almost felt like I had peaked, and the momentum had was just kind of carrying me through. And I still kept taking trips, but I almost just felt like I was going through the motions, and so I was kind of looking for the chapter in my life. I felt like I was looking for something else, and um, so we took a trip. My partner and I took a trip to the North Cascades in Washington State, and we went and we hiked. We crossed several major glaciers, and we set up our camp, a little tent on a little ledge in the middle of nowhere. And we didn't actually climb anything. We just kind of sat in the tent for a couple days, and then we said, "Hey, you want to go home?" And yeah, so we turned around.
Uh-oh, I might have lost you. Can you still
We
hear me?
rented a kayak on Puget Sound, and we were just kayaking. I'd always known that I had wanted to. Yep, yep.
Okay.
And if okay, good. Okay, it's
We're
gonna be a
good
little
now.
spotty. The connection here is a little okay. So yeah, we had rented a kayak and we were, out on the water, and there was sailboats zipping back and forth. And I'd always known that I had wanted to learn to sail. I had been boating my whole life, on the Great Lakes, and I had done a lot of offshore fishing out of Hawaii and stuff like that for yellowfin tuna. So I had a lot of, a lifetime of boating experience. I knew how to navigate. I knew how to drive a boat and everything, docking and all that. But I had never actually sailed a boat, and I decided this is it. I'm gonna learn how. And so
Wow.
I looked up how much sailing lessons were, and I was like, holy cow! For the price of that, I can just buy a sailboat and teach myself. And so I did. That's what I did. I like shopped on Craigslist. I shopped around. I knew the boat that I wanted was I wanted to get a CNC. They're because they're well-made boats, and they're old, classic plastic, but they still um, they're so well made that they hold their value. And so I
Yeah.
shopped around on Craigslist, and I found one that was for sale down in Olympia, and I bought it sight unseen because it was the right price and it was the right. And so the first time I ever stepped foot onto a sailboat was the I bought when
Wow.
I actually took possession of it. Motored it from Olympia
Wow.
to Seattle, which was 50 nautical miles. I motored it home and by myself, and then I took it through the locks into Seattle by myself, and then I went sailing for the first time by myself. So the first time I ever went sailing,
Wow.
I was actually single-handed, and I just took it easy. I just put up the main and kind of put it around until I felt comfortable with that, and then I put up the jib until I put it around until I felt comfortable with that, and then I tried going out and progressively more and more wind, and I tried different angles and different techniques, and learned how to do wing and wing and stuff like that, and just kind of worked my way up, just gently, but just teaching myself what I could along the way and absorbing everything I could from YouTube and the internet and books and stuff like that. And I've always been pretty good about teaching myself stuff. So
Wow.
yeah. After that, I sailed, a few thousand nautical miles around the Puget Sound and the San Juans and stuff. I with people sometimes or by myself a lot of the time. And so yeah, that was my progression from being a boater and but avid climber into a full-time sailor.
I feel like we could have a conversation like for an hour just about that part of your answer because first and foremost, I'm curious what I'm totally familiar with CNCs and I agree they're absolutely wonderful, wonderfully built as well, boats. And I'm curious what length of boat did you end up getting, like the 24? There's so many like under 30, or where were you with that?
Yeah, it was a 24
Mm-hmm.
CNC 24, so that was the smallest boat that they make. But
Yep.
honestly, it's a little big boat, or a big little boat.
Yeah.
It's small, but it sails like a lot bigger boat, and feels like a lot bigger
Yeah.
boat. And it's they're pretty capable. So I was
Yeah.
able to kind of, at least project myself mentally into what it would be like to sail a bigger boat, or it had everything that I needed to basically learn the skills
Oh yeah.
without being overwhelmed, basically, because the
And I
loads were all still easy enough to handle. On light wind you could just handle the sheets by hand and stuff like that, so it wasn't too overwhelming.
Yeah, I'm curious. Those boats have a pretty nice size beam for their length, I think, if I
Hmm.
remember right. And so it adds, I
Yeah,
think, just to the roominess and the overall big boat sort of feel that you get. But I'm
that's
also wondering
that's exactly right.
that you mentioned the Great Lakes, and I am keeping my boat up on Lake Superior. So which Great Lakes were you romping around in before
Oh, I
back in the day?
Lake Erie, only Lake Erie, but because my granddad, he lived in Rocky River, which is a suburb of Cleveland,
Oh,
and so we
sure.
would go
Okay,
we would go fishing for walleye on
cool.
the great on Lake Erie a lot on the weekends, so we did quite a bit of that.
Cool.
but never
Well,
never anything too far offshore out there or anything.
yeah, okay. I just am thinking, so I'm going to jump forward just a little bit, being the adventurer that you are, because I know you were a avid climber, and then you got into sailing. How did you find out about the mini globe race, or otherwise known as the MGR? And what what made you decide I've got to do this?
So the story goes, I was riding the bus to work one day, and I was listening to the Sail Magazine podcast, and they were interviewing this crazy Australian guy named Don McIntyre. And Don is the founder of not only the Mini Globe Race, but also the Ocean Globe Race, which is a rebirth of the original Whitbread, which is a
Yep,
crude race around the world, but with stops. But also
yep.
the Golden Globe Race, which is his kind of pinnacle event, which is the recreation of the original Golden Globe race from 68, 69, where they sail solo nonstop on, relatively small boats, 35, 36 feet, without any outside assistance, with no communications. They have to use sextant for navigation, so they have no GPS or anything like that. And so, yeah, he talked about the Golden Globe race, and he talked about the Ocean Globe race, and he talked about uh, a bunch of adventures that he had done, and then he went on to describe the Mini Globe race. And these people were going to build 19-foot plywood boats at home, and they required minimal boat building skills. You had to be pretty handy, but you didn't have to have built a number of boats or anything like that. And I just thought to myself, and the idea behind the concept behind the Mini Globe race was to make ocean sailing and circumnavigation accessible for people that are maybe of average means, but above
Yep.
average ambition, what I like to say.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I thought, well, that's me.
That's
So,
cool.
the seed was planted. I went to work and I watched a couple of videos of Dawn sailing Trekka, which was hole number one, and I was hooked immediately. The hook was set, and I was like, okay, I got to buy a set of plans, and I got to do this because it's totally within my abilities, and I think that it's the opportunity for the ultimate adventure. I went on so many climbing trips to these far-reaching places in the world, and my coworkers would always say, "Oh, you're going on for the adventure of a lifetime," and for me, it was just another year, the adventure of the year or whatever.
Yeah.
But this time, I think we found one that actually is the adventure of a lifetime. So that was kind
Wow.
of how I came to it. And I bought a set of plans, and 6 months I bought a kit from B&B Yachts in Borough, North Carolina. And once it arrived, about 6 months later, I was off and running.
So you had some, like I'm assuming, uh, did you build it at home? Did you rent a spot to build or a boat yard? How did she become born, Skookum?
So so I had the fortune that I was working as a marine technician on
Oh,
big power yachts, usually from 40 to 140 feet. And so I had access to the facilities after hours. They would let me work after business hours at the shop. And then my best friend, who lives in Lacey, Washington, which is about 60 miles south of Seattle, he has a big shop. With one half of it is a machine shop where he's got mill and lathe, and he does a bunch of metal work, welding and stuff like that. But the other half of it was just basically storage. And so uh, I made a deal with him to clear out a space for me to build the boat, and then he's let me spend the next 2.5 years getting everything in there covered with dust
wow.
and epoxy.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so I was
Wow.
pretty fortunate that I had the resources basically available to be able to undertake the endeavor. So yeah, he was a big part of it, making it all possible. So yeah, that I was pretty lucky.
I remember recently watching another a documentary about another well, I guess it would have been the Globe 5.80 race because I don't think that they had the meet MGR at that point in time, but it was of a gentleman from the UK, I believe, and there's a documentary about him building one of these boats. And I remember
Hmm.
several times throughout the building process, there were these moments of like, he thought, am I going to get through this ever? Did you ever come up against something like that where you just thought, man, this project, it's never going to end. I'm never going to get there. And if you did, how did you sort of motivate yourself to get through those roadblocks?
Yeah, absolutely. Like the I believe the film you might be referring to is Marikai, and the guy Keith
Yeah,
Oliver
that's
who
it.
built his boat. he and I were, I mean, I took a lot of inspiration from that, although my boat was pretty well along by then, but basically he made it just barely. He finished his boat like 2 weeks before he towed it to Portugal, and he had never sailed it before he sailed from Lanzarote to the Canaries when he did the Transat, which is a separate event. And so yeah, there's a lot of parallels between his story and mine as far as like just barely kind of finishing things in time to be able to compete. And so yeah, there was many times when I was ready to give up. And my partner name's Kathy. She's basically been the one that has kept me going this whole time. Every time I was ready to quit, she was just like, "No, you're not going to quit. You're doing this. You've already done it."
Yeah.
So yeah, there was times I had problems with fiberglass where because I was teaching myself how to do all that sort of thing, where I was like, "Oh man, this is gonna," I had an issue that costed me a couple of months actually,
Oh
2 months
my.
that it took me to. I put some fiberglass on and it didn't adhere to the hull, and so I had to grind it all off and start over, and that was like 8 weeks lost. And I'm like, oh man, that's the 8 weeks that I'm gonna need to make it at the end. And kind of with the same thing, almost like climbing a big mountain, like you just have to take it not necessarily one step at a time, but you just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And
Yeah.
as long as you do, as long as you don't allow yourself to stop, then you will eventually get there. If you look at it as a whole project from beginning to end, it's easy to be overwhelmed and think, oh man, I'm never going to finish there. There's so much to do. But if you just focus on, kind of getting to that next step, on a mountain, you get to that next rock, or you get to that next small objective, and then you think, okay, from here I'll go to the next one. And so you just kind of focus on what's in front of you. That's always what I try to remind myself to do. Is just focus on what's in front of me, get that step done, and then we'll move on to the next step. And you have to do a little pre-visualization, but I tried not to think too far ahead because then it would have been easy to get psyched out. And so that was kind of how I kept myself going through it.
I'm curious too, were you in, I don't know how soon people sign up for the race. I have a friend who's in the Golden Globe race, and it sounds like they have maybe monthly meetings with all the skippers. And so I'm curious, like, did you have equivalent for the MGR where you were in contact with the other skippers and kind of sharing issues back and forth and, advice to one another, or, just sort of getting through the whole thing together, because I think some people bought their boats already built, correct? But there were still others who were like you, who were in the process of building them.
Yeah, I think like three of the entrants bought boats that were already built and had
Yeah.
already been raced. But absolutely, and that's we definitely helped each other a lot along the way. We had about meetings once it got closer to the start of the MGR, we had meetings about every 6 months where we would sit down with Don and he would kind of go over the logistics of the event. But as far as building the boats go, like we had a WhatsApp group, and I was in constant contact with pretty much everybody here. By the time I actually met these people in person in Antigua, I had already known them for 2 or 2.5 years, where we had bounced
Cool.
ideas off each other, and this didn't work for me, or I would say, oh, hey, don't forget to do this, or you'll have to go back a few steps. And so we definitely, like, I don't want to say held each other's hands, but we certainly helped each other a lot along the way, and we shared resources. And I got my stove gimbal for my jet boil from Canada, Dan from Canada, and things like that. And the community aspect, the almost brotherhood of those 15 of us that have committed to doing this, is really a big part of what appeals to me about it. How it brought together people from all over the world. There's, entrants from Spain and Ireland and Germany and England and Australia, and obviously myself from the US, and there's people building in South America and stuff like that. And we all kind of came together to kind of make this thing happen collectively. And the community aspect of it is probably my favorite part about the whole thing, really.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, just to think about how everybody from all over the world has this one goal, this shared sort of vision of this dream, and to realize this dream. Yeah, Don is a pretty amazing guy to like conceptualize all these different events that he's created. And this one, I think this one seems to fascinate me the most, just because of I mean, I know people refit, like for like my friend Olivia, she just got done. Well, she's not done yet, but she's, I think, wrapping up some of the refit for the Golden Globe with her boat. But you guys that are actually building from the ground up, literally your boats, it blows my mind away. And not only that part of the event where you're building your own vessel, but then it's a small vessel. It's only 5.8 meters or just 19.02 feet I think is what it says when you convert from meters to feet. And to be able to sail a boat of that size across oceans is just, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to knock what the bigger boat folks are doing because that's really tough too, but this small boat journeying or passaging across oceans in smaller boats just blows my mind. It really does.
Yeah, and that is it's just a testament to the design. The design is based off of it was designed by a Polish guy named Janusz Maderski, and he had designed a boat called the Setka, which is a 5-meter boat, home built out of plywood and fiberglass the same way. And Don had seen the Setkas and he thought, well, heck, if you were to just make it a little bit bigger, I mean, these little boats have crossed the Atlantic, 20 of them or something like that without incident. And that would make for a really capable ocean going boat. And
Yeah.
so he asked to add a frame, which is what he did. He stretched it by one frame, made it into 5.8 meters. And it's kind of this 19 feet long. It's got a 7.5-foot beam, so it's pretty beamy. And it feels bigger inside, and it feels like a little big boat. It's small, but it feels bigger than it is. I like to say it punches above its weight class,
Yeah.
because and there's so much safety kind of built in, and there's such a big margin of safety built in with the construction that it makes for a really seaworthy little boat. It's got 2 watertight bulkheads, one fore and aft. It's got a watertight crash box in the bow. It's got 3 bilge pumps. You've got your full set of electronics with AIS and GPS and VHF and chart plotter and everything. And it's got a really high freeboard, so it's actually a pretty dry boat.
Yeah.
Unless you're in a going upwind, technically you take some water over the bow, but for the most part, it's really safe. Like, I headed out onto the Atlantic because I didn't do the Transat qualifier. I sailed from Beaufort, North Carolina to Antigua to make it to the start. And that was, 1,600 miles in 20 days, and most of it upwind. I'd say probably 18 of those days upwind. And I started out, so I'll back up a second here. When I was building the boat, anytime that I was angry or frustrated or not feeling good about how things were going, I would stop, and I would take a little break and give myself a little break from it. I only tried to build it when I was feeling positive. So I only tried to put love into the boat. I figured if I put my heart and soul into it, then it'll give it back to me. And it absolutely has,
Yeah.
it's really well founded. And I never at no point did I feel like I was in any danger because of the boat and because of its size. It's so small and it's not a planing boat. It's a displacement hull, so it sits down in the water, but it just rises to meet the waves. It kind of bobs like a cork. So even in 20-foot waves, you look over your shoulder and you'll say, holy cow, that's a big wave, because it'll be towering up as big as the mast, but it just rises to meet it and then back down the other side. So yeah,
Wow.
they're a little squirrely, it's a little bit squirrely. Like, if you get into a confused sea, then it's kind of easy to get tossed around a little bit. If you're sliding down the face of a wave, you can get to where the wind will get behind the sails, and you got to kind of catch it out before it'll round up and that sort of thing. And the rudder's pretty small, so in a big gust, if you're not doing it just right, then it tends to round up. But for the most part, there's no hesitation in my mind, or I don't feel like the boat is the limiting factor. That little thing is way stronger than I am.
I love what you said about how the positive energy into the boat, the love into the boat, and that's what you get back out of it. I had total goosebumps when you said that, by the way. Just wanted to let you know that. So I wanted to let people know. So yes, you didn't do the qualifier from the Canaries to Antigua, right? That was the qualifier. Is that right? but
That's a qualifier.
one of
Yeah.
them.
But yeah, as long as you sail 750 nautical miles in your boat and you can prove your sextant logs to that you can do celestial navigation should you need to, if you lost all your electrics, then you're technically qualified.
So I just want to make sure I understand too. So with the MGR, you are allowed to use GPS. You are allowed to use chart plotters and all of the tech, right? You are allowed to use that. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. Yep.
But you
And
do have
matter of fact, if you don't have that stuff, you can't.
okay.
Yeah,
But
you have to prove that all that stuff works before you get your green card to be able to go.
okay, but you do also have a sextant on board that you must be proficient in using as well, correct?
Yeah, that's right. You got to show
Okay.
that you can do sun sights and you can do plotting on universal sheets, just because there's, if you get struck by lightning or who knows, so many things can
Yeah,
happen. Your batteries could go flat or whatever. But
right.
if you're out in the middle of the ocean on a tiny little boat, they want you to be able to they want to know that you can be able to find your way home.
Yeah. And I do remember following you when you were sailing that leg to Antigua from was North Carolina, you said, right? Beaufort, North Carolina?
Yeah,
Yeah. And I remember
that's
Don was
right.
talking about how you were having a lot of headwinds and that it was a bit of a rough ride or something. And then there was the
Yeah.
other guy. Who was the other gentleman
So the
that
other
was
guy is
the Sun Bear?
Eric Marsh, the Sun Bear from Australia, and Sun Bear is actually a boat that was built in California. And as another example of the community spirit, Michael Moyer, the guy that built that boat, helped me a lot with mine as far as giving me advice and stuff like that. And he made a really good blog about his build, and I used those photos so much in building
Oh,
my own. That my boat's it's pretty close copy to Sun Bear with the exception of I laid my deck out a little bit differently. And his boat is immaculate. He obviously really knew what he was doing because it's absolutely beautiful. But yeah, Eric Marsh bought that boat from him in Florida after the 2023 Transat, and he sailed it from Florida to Antigua as well. And he was upwind the entire way in the trades, and he was just beating. He had to make so many tacks. I think it was like he sailed like 1,200 miles, even though it's only 850 as the crow flies or something like that.
wow.
And when
Yeah.
it was interesting when I was in Beaufort, everybody was asking me like, aren't you going to go down the ICW and leave from Florida? Why aren't you going to go down the ICW and leave from Florida? I got asked that so many times, and I said, no, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to be sailing
Yeah.
upwind in the trade wind the whole way. And as it turned out, I did end up sailing upwind most of the way, and it is a downwind boat. It's pretty much designed to go with the trades. If you're going to sail around the world, it's meant to sail downwind in the trade winds, but
Mm.
it's still perfectly capable of going upwind. Um, and I spent 20 days, and it was wet and it was a wild ride, and it slams a lot because it's a small boat, but
Yeah.
uh, I didn't have as rough of a time as he did because I had the sea room to run basically. So like I was going upwind, but I didn't have to tack because
Right.
all I had to do if I couldn't make my heading was just bear away or go south for a couple of days until the wind shifted and I could go back southeast again. So
Yeah.
because I had so much sea, I went almost out to the Bermuda before I turned south. And that gave me enough room to just kind of do what I needed to do to get there. I think there was 2 days where I spent like 5 hours tacking the other direction, but that was it.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So the boat was built in Seattle. You had to get it to North Carolina, right? You went straight from across the United States, trailering the boat. And then, but before you did that, because I wanted to say, well, so was the trip to Antigua sort of the shakedown cruise, or did you have an opportunity to do some extensive sailing with the boat in the Seattle area before you made the move over to the East Coast, the Eastern Seaboard?
No, not really. The answer is no.
Yeah.
Because I finished it just in time to be
Hmm.
able to make it to the start. Like everything kind of happened just in time. And so I
Yeah.
finished in Seattle and I launched it on October 18th. And I spent a few weeks doing the electrics and stuff like that. And then when I actually had the boat ready to go, where it was able to be sailed, and I was going to take it from Seattle down to Olympia, which is 50 nautical miles. It's not terribly far, but you have to negotiate the narrows and stuff like that. There's some navigational things that you have to do there, but there was no wind,
Yeah.
absolutely none. So I was like, well, I could put the sails up and just bob around in circles, but because I kind of have to make a timeline, I wasn't able to do that. So no, I just motored it
Yeah.
like 50 miles, put it back on the trailer, and then we towed it from Seattle to Los Angeles, and then from LA to North Carolina, because I didn't want to go anywhere. It was December, and I didn't want to go anywhere with
Oh,
potential for snow.
yep.
And so I
Mhm.
took it on Highway 10 and went through, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and Alabama and stuff. So I went across as far south as I could do it comfortably, basically. And so then I launched it in North Carolina, put the sails on, and kind of did the final fitting out. And then I sailed it like 2 days, maybe like 5 hours in the Neuse River, which is
Oh, yeah.
just
Uh-huh.
inside of the Barrier Islands out of Oriental.
Yep. Yep.
And
Uh,
and yeah, that was it. That was the limit of my experience with sailing it. So yeah, when I headed offshore from Beaufort, that was the shakedown. Like going across the Gulf Stream, we had 25 knots blowing 35 and big seas, and I kind of just put my faith in the boat and just let it take care of me. They always say you take care of the boat and the boat takes care of you, and that's exactly what happened. And because I had always in my mind like focused on the difficult parts of the passages, like the Torres Strait, is in between Australia and Papua New Guinea there, and then obviously we're going to have to go around the Cape of Good Hope, which is probably the crux of the whole thing. And in my mind, I always kept those difficult passages in my mind, and I built the boat for strength rather than speed. Anytime that you had the choice between making it lighter or making it stronger, I chose to make it stronger, and it never let me down. I mean, honestly, it's been really solid up until now. I haven't had to do much in the way of repairs or anything like that. It's all worked perfectly.
So I would be curious, with the leg from North Carolina to Antigua, and then from the leg, the actual true leg of the start of the race for the MGR, leaving from Antigua and then to Panama. What were some things as far as the boat's concerned, were things that maybe when she got to Antigua, you're like, you know what, I think I'm going to fine tune that, or maybe I need to do this. And I kind of would like to know a little also, as a sailor, what sort of things did you take away from that passage to Antigua that maybe you used as some more tools in the sailor's toolbox to help you on that first passage of the MGR from Antigua to Panama?
So, well, first of all, the boat is perfect. I didn't have to change anything. Everything worked exactly the way that I wanted it to and exactly the way that I intended it to. So I never really felt like I needed to make any changes. Everything just worked perfectly. And so more to the point, like it was more psychological than anything, like I had to get used to the sounds that the boat made, and you kind of get out there and you listen to it and you kind of, okay, so this is the sound of that. And this is the sound of that. There was no creaking or groaning from the rig or anything like that. The rudder was a little loose and I was having some trouble with the wind vane at first. Because I was unfamiliar with it, and those, man, is it coming apart? Is it not? But then I gave it a little bit more time and realized that everything was just fine, and so it was more just convincing myself that everything was okay when it actually was, and so I had to. I was sailing, and I was probably 4 days out of Beaufort or something like that, and I was trying to sail 130 degrees and I just could not go that way. The only way I could go was northwest or northeast or southwest. That was the only thing available to me. And so I sailed back and forth in front of a wall basically for a whole day. And I was completely psyched out. I was like, this isn't going to work. All the forecast models are showing me that I'm not going to arrive until the 25th, and the race was supposed to start on the 23rd. And I was like, I'm never going to make it. And again,
Oh
I
my.
I talked to my partner and I was just like, I'm done. I can't make it. I'm gonna turn around and go back. And she was like, don't. She's like, it's the wind. It blows all over, and just give it until tomorrow, and things will be different, and things will be better. And so I was like, okay, I'll give it one more day. And I did, and she was right. The next day the wind shifted, and I was able to carry on. And so that happened a few different times where I was just like ready to give up. But then I just told myself basically just give it one more day and see what tomorrow brings, and things will be better. And they usually were. And so that was what got me there really. And then, so once I got to Antigua, I had only sailed the boat upwind. And so the leg one from Antigua to Panama for me was a totally new experience, basically, because I had to learn how to sail the boat downwind. The boat flies asymmetrical spinnakers off the bowsprit, and I had never done that. And I don't have roller furlers for them, so I got to launch them out of the hatch, and I got to take them down into the cockpit by hand and everything. And so I had to learn how to do all that. And if you want to go fast, you got to fly two spinnakers at the same time. And so eventually I got the hang of that. And I kind of worked my way up. I started out doing about 100 miles a day, and then 105, and then 110, and eventually I got to 120. And so I got to learn how to make the boat more efficient and to keep it sailing downwind, because sailing downwind with a wind vane, especially if the wind is light, can be difficult because there's not enough wind to drive the vane, and you kind of want to be almost on a reach to give the wind vane something to do. And so that took a lot of hand steering and quite a few sleepless nights, but eventually I did get the hang of it. And so I feel a lot better for this leg as far as being able to continue that, basically build upon that, and increase my mileage, to where I can keep up with the fleet a little bit.
Yeah, that's really cool that you were able to keep building the miles up with the nautical miles getting better or bigger and bigger as you became more acquainted with how to sail the boat downwind like that. I'm actually glad that you brought up you said asymmetrical spinnakers, I think, because I don't think I asked you, and I meant to, if we could kind of just talk a little bit about the sail plan that you have on the boat. I know you said there's a wind vane. I also was curious too on the keels on those boats. What kind of keels are on them? I don't remember. I mean, is it a lifting, retractable? Is it a fin? I'm curious.
It's a steel plate fin with a lead bulb at the bottom. It's about 530 pounds, and the boats have a really high riding moment, so they really want to stand up. So they self-right. If you get knocked down, and it happens, you catch a wave right on the side, they often just come out of nowhere when you least expect them, and you get knocked over, and things will fly across the cabin or anything, but it always just comes right back up. It's never a problem. So it's got a good amount of ballast, and they sail really well. And as far as the sail plan goes, you're allowed 7 sails for the race, total. And so I only have 6, but I've got the main sail and the jib, and then there's a storm jib, which goes on an inner forestay. And then you've got 3 asymmetrical spinnakers, an A3, an A5, and an A7, from big to small. And the A3 is kind of for more lighter air, like 10 to 15 knots, and then the A5 is like 15 to 20, and then the A7 is like 20 to 25. It can fly in some pretty big wind, and it's not fairly small. It's big compared to a jib, but it kind of works like a jib, where you can almost point with it, a beam reach, or even a little bit above that. So yeah, it's pretty comprehensive, and the really competitive guys up at the front, they're flying the A7 and the A5 at the same time, or the A3 and the A5 at the same time, depending on wind conditions. I wasn't so confident, so I did a lot of I would just pull out the jib on one side and then fly either the A7 or the A5 on the other side, because I felt like I was in control a little bit more that way. But obviously not as quick.
Wow, that sounds like I don't know. Like I get overwhelmed just by my roller furling Jenny. I can't imagine sailing with more than one head sail at a time. But I actually tried to look into getting my boat converted to a cutter rig, but the rigging folks I talked to, they steered me away from it, because I see the value and I like the idea of that inner forestay, so you can put up a storm jib. I would feel, because with the roller furling, my understanding is that the sail shape can be compromised when you furl it down. So that's kind of the reason why I was hoping to have like rig for cutter, so that I could, if I wanted to, or maybe I could somehow figure out how to do an inner forestay so I could fly a storm sail instead, because that makes me feel better that that's what that sail is designed for. The fabric is different than the roller furling head sail. And anyway, but yeah, it sounds like a lot to manage. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it really it is. but as you know, it's just like anything else. It's like building the boat or making, taking it sailing for the first time or making your first offshore passage. You just take it one step at a time. You kind of build the skills, so you start by I started by just for the first couple days, I just had the pulled out jib on one side, and then I did the main sail with the preventer on the other side. It's got 3 reefs in it, so you just reef it down. And I've got the roller furler for the jib, and yeah, you compromise with the sail shape for sure, but in high winds, in anything over 20-25 knots, you can furl away the jib to where you just have a little hanky sticking out and like still make
Yeah.
good way and still have a pretty balanced rig. So
Yeah.
I found that it worked really well. I spent a lot of time, furling in and letting it out and furling it in and letting it out. And the same thing with the main, you'd put the full main up in the morning if the wind was light, and then the squalls would come and you'd see the squall coming. So you go down to the first reef, and then the wind builds, you go down to the second reef, and it continues to build. You go down to the third reef, and the squall hits, and you get blown around a little bit, and then it passes
Wow.
over and the wind gets light again, and you put the thing all the way back up and you do it all over again. And so, yeah, it was definitely the same thing, kind of a progression of skills. And so then once I was comfortable with the pulled out jib and the main, then I started reefing the main down and doing the pulled out jib and the A7, and kind of figuring out what angle that was good for. And then what if, with lighter, if the wind was a little lighter, I tried the 8.5 and stuff like that. So yeah, it was just
Yeah.
a matter of just working my way up to it.
That's kind of cool because I mean, I'm not sure. I'm assuming that there must be some sort of a time frame in which you can complete that first, well, not just first, but all the legs of the MGR. Or is there a certain amount of time? Like, did you hear about the guy who did the Vendée Globe who finished last apparently, but because he finished one day late past the deadline, like it doesn't count or something
Oh,
crazy like that?
heartbreaking.
Yeah. So is there like a
Oh,
time limit for how many days you get to complete each leg of the race in the MGR?
yeah. Originally the plan was that once 25% of the fleet, it was Grackle, once 25% of the fleet had arrived at any leg restart, you had 2 weeks to make it there, basically. And that's, I
Okay.
think, kind of how they're going to do it. Just the idea is to keep the fleet together because they don't want everybody to get so spread out that the
Right.
people in the back are then at risk of hurricane season the next year, because
Yeah.
we're supposed to finish March, April 2026. And
Mm-hmm.
they don't want you to get into May or June or something like that, where you're trying to make it across the South Atlantic and back to the Caribbean, because then you're kind of
Yeah.
into hurricane season at that point. So yeah, there definitely is time gates, and they definitely want you to be as quick as you can, even if you're not, trying. Because some of the guys, they're not super competitive. They're just out here to
Yeah.
compete in the event and to kind of have a good time, cruising around the world with their international group of friends, and
Yeah.
so but you do still have to stay with the group, just for safety, really. Yeah,
Yeah. Well,
yeah, so
go ahead.
you could potentially get disqualified if you fell too far behind, but the way that everybody's been sailing, everybody's been doing really good and averaging at least 100 miles a day. We're all pretty well, we all get along pretty well. So I don't foresee it, as long as, nobody gets hit with anything serious, that there would be
Yeah.
any reason
Well, speaking of anything
anybody
serious,
wouldn't be able to keep up.
yeah, I want to be mindful of your time. I know it's we're closing in on 3. So are you okay to go just maybe about
Oh yeah,
another 12 more minutes or so?
no
Because
problem.
I have a whole list of questions, but maybe we could do a part 2 at some point
Yeah,
when
perfect.
you're in the next part of the journey. I am a little curious, although I don't want to. I mean, I know it's kind of probably hard to talk about some of these scary things, but getting back to the Vendée Globe, and one of the racers we had been following was Pip Hare, and of course you probably know what happened to her. And
Yeah,
so
she's my favorite.
yeah, and it makes me think, I think, and also talking with my friend in the GGR, there's the contingency plans for jury rigs and things in that regard. So I'm sort of curious, how do you as mini globe racers, how do you prepare your boats for in case something, the unthinkable would happen, where maybe you would, lose a mast? Do you have to go into it with a sort of a plan or a setup for if you need to build a jury rig? Is that something that's a requirement in the race?
Yeah, that's definitely part of the rules. You have to carry two spinnaker poles, even if you don't plan to use them, because you could if you lost the mast while you were using one, you could very easily lose it, you know. And you have to be able, you don't have to prove your plan for a jury rig, but you definitely have to have one. And obviously because you know, they're you expect the unexpected or whatever you want to say. But yeah, so I mean, personally, I have, you know, the second spinnaker pole, and I carry one spare of the longest stay. And so if you were to lose the forestay, for example, I could rig something up. So I have a length of 316 wire, and so and some wire clamps and stuff like that. So I could make a temporary mast out of a spinnaker pole, and then use whatever I have left over, you know, to kind of try to make some way. And then you have to have a plan for emergency steering. So, you know, if you lose the rudder, how do you steer the boat, you know? And for me, I have a plan to use, I have towing warps for storms. Some people have storm drogue, but I have a 300 meter, or 100 meter length of half-inch rope that you can use. And there's actually tricks, that you can learn to steer the boat that way by pulling some in and letting some out, and then, steering the boat with the sails. So, yeah, you definitely have to think about that stuff. You know, you try not to focus on it too much because
Yeah,
you don't want to bring it to yourself, but at the same
right.
time, you can't be ignorant of it.
And I think also just knowing that you have a plan, that probably makes you feel more confident in things too. Like if something does happen, you have a plan, you know what you need to do, you have the tools, you know, it's all there for you. So, I mean, I think that I don't remember where I read it, but something about a good sailor is a prepared sailor, right? Because you just don't ever know. And it's just good to be prepared and plan for things. So, um, I think the last thing I kind of want to shift into before we get into like how people can follow your journey and learn all your socials and all that is what are you looking forward to with this next leg of the journey? I mean, and tell folks where you're leaving from because you didn't actually go through the Panama Canal with the boat on the boat, but the boat made its way there. Like, can you kind of tell us how that all happened and when you're going to be leaving and where you're going to be heading to?
Yeah, sure. So we trailered the boats across because logistically 19-foot boats through the canal just wouldn't work. The boats, you might be able to find some way to make it happen, but you would get pretty beat up. And then you got to have four line handlers and a pilot, and you got to feed them and everything. And there's just no room for that many bodies on board. So we trailered them across, and we're now on the Pacific side. We're at what is it, Flamenco Marina, which is kind of the big one here, just outside of the canal entrance. And the next leg starts on Tuesday, the 25th, and we're sailing for the next intermediate pit stop is the Marquesas. So we'll go from Panama to the Marquesas, Marquesas to Tahiti, and Tahiti to Tonga, and then to Fiji. And Fiji is where the leg two will end. And then everybody comes back together, and on July 25th, we'll start off again on leg three. And so what I'm looking forward to is just being back in the Pacific. For me, that's home waters, you know. I'm a lot more familiar with this ocean, and when I got into the Atlantic, I didn't realize how different it was going to be. You know, I thought
Yeah.
once you shore, the ocean is kind of the ocean, but the Atlantic was very different. And the same thing with the Caribbean Sea. It was completely different from the Atlantic. And so they all have their own unique character. And for me, the Pacific is home. And so that I'm really excited to be back in the Pacific. And I've always I mean, I think everybody who's a sailor and who dreams about offshore passages, like thinks about the South Pacific Islands, you know, and how that's kind of paradise as far as sailing and cruising goes. And so, yeah, getting to the Marquesas, French Polynesia, and seeing, you know, white sand beaches and atolls
Yeah.
and things like that. And so that's really inspiring. This next passage is anticipated to take as few as 40, but as many as 60 days.
Wow.
So I
Yeah.
think
Okay.
everybody will make it, you know, I think everybody should make it in 50 or less, because as long as you're averaging 100 miles a day, and obviously there'll be some slow days through the doldrums and stuff like that, but it should be perfectly reasonable. But it's a long time on a little boat, you know, so
How many
having
nautical
enough,
miles is that? I can't, is that like 4,400 or something? Is it neat?
4,000.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
You know, the challenge is to bring enough food and water. You know, water
Yeah.
primarily. Food is easy. The boat's got plenty of storage. No worries there about bringing enough food. That's really easy to do. But bringing enough water, you know, being conservative with it, and not being frivolous, I think is the most important thing. You know, and if you got to catch rainwater, you just kind of put the first reef in the main
Yeah.
and bag out that part of the sail and wait for it to get kind of rinsed of the salt and then put a bucket under
Yeah.
it, and I think you can catch water pretty easily that way. So
So you
there's
don't
definitely
have a
plans
water
for that.
maker? You don't have a water
No, we're
maker
not.
on board?
Nope. Nope. You got to carry
Wow.
everything. Like you can have a
Wow.
manual desalinator, like those little kind of ones that they have in life rafts, but
Uh-huh.
if you use it, you take a time penalty. And the idea behind that is
Oh,
that the people who are real serious racers will get 10 miles offshore and they'll dump all their water to save weight, and then they'll try
oh,
to manually desalinate the whole way. And yeah,
wow.
it doesn't work. And in the tropical heat, you're going to burn 2 liters to make one, just
Oh
in
my
sweat and
gosh.
pumping that thing. So yeah, you're not allowed any water makers. You're pretty much required to carry everything. So everybody's planning on leaving with at least 150 liters. I think,
Hmm.
any less than that, and you'd be kind of pushing it as far as your consumption, So,
Yeah, I would be
I mean,
curious that,
personally, I drink about 2 liters a day. Well, I drink two
yeah,
liters a day.
yeah. Okay. I would be curious,
Yeah, so
maybe
I
next.
drink 2 liters a day. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Oh, I just was going to say, I would be curious if we can get together another time. I would love to kind of delve into some of the provisioning sorts of strategies that you use for storing on the boat. And like you said, if the trip can take anywhere from 40 to 60 days, that's a pretty big, I guess plan for 60,
Yep.
or more, right? More than 60, just in case. I don't know. Because provisioning, it's a whole other thing in and of itself, I think. Well, I know it's almost closing in on 3, and like I said, I know you guys are getting ready to leave, and I want to be very mindful and respectful of your valuable time. So I want to thank you so much for coming on to my little podcast. But before we leave, I definitely want to have you let folks know how they can get in touch with you. But are there any closing thoughts that you would like to sort of share before we sign off?
Sure. So for me, the reason why, or well, a big part of the motivation of why to do this is to share the journey with everyone else. That's why I'm happy to come on and happy to chat with you. And I'd be glad to continue on. If you wanted to make a little series out of it, we can catch up again in one
Yeah,
of Tahiti or something, wherever I have a decent connection, honestly.
right
Um,
on.
yeah, because given I feel like I could have named the little boat vicariously, because I want to give people the opportunity to come along for the ride, because it's
Yeah.
pretty cool. It's unique. It's the first time in the world it's ever been done, and a lot of people think, oh, it's crazy and it can't be done and that sort of thing, and not in the idea of proving them wrong, but just to kind of say like, as long as you believe in yourself and you take care of all the P's and Q's, you kind of might, like you said, you prepare well, then anything's possible, a lot of it just comes down to believing that you can do it.
Yeah,
And
I love that.
I would hope to be able to inspire people who may be looking to take the leap. They've always wanted to sail across the Pacific, or they've always wanted to make an ocean passage, and they've never wanted to go offshore, never, felt confident to go offshore. That it is in fact possible as long as you prepare yourself well and you believe that you can do it, then you absolutely can.
Yeah, that's great. I have goosebumps again. That's just amazing. I'm looking forward to your documentary and one day your book too, right? That'll be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, it's really amazing what you guys are doing. I just I'm so excited to follow along, and absolutely it definitely inspires me as a sailor. And I just also like the aspect of not just the sailing part of it, but just like, how we can in our own lives deal with these challenges and keep moving forward, and just using it to, building upon becoming a stronger person, and how we face adversity, and how we
Absolutely.
embrace the beautiful moments that life throws our way as well. So thank you so much. Can you let people know
Exactly.
how they can follow you and your journey then? What's the best way?
Yeah, the best way is social media. I have Instagram and Facebook. My accounts are Josh Cayley Ocean Racing, so you can find me there. I have a PR person that I typically my connectivity is not good enough to make updates while I'm at sea, but I send photos and little blurbs to her, and she posts for me. So you
Okay.
can follow along that way. The Yellow Brick Tracker, which is a pretty common app you can download. It's called YB Races, which a lot of smaller regattas already use. The Global Solo Challenge uses YB Races, and the Pacific Cup and stuff like that. So if you were to download YB Races, you can find the mini globe race on there, and you can follow me step by step. It updates every 4 hours, so you can always see right where we are. And
Cool.
yeah,
Okay.
that's the best way. That's the best way. And I always like to say at the end that I am completely self-supported, and I am supported primarily by donors. So if you're willing to contribute to seeing this sort of adventure go on, or you like this sort of thing, like I have a GoFundMe that you can help me along the way, buy me a couple of dehydrated meals or something like that.
Cool. Right on. Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. Yeah, I know. I was curious. Does the Don's MGR website, do they have tracker on there too for you? They did for the race from the Canaries to Antigua, I know, and I think from Antigua to Panama. Is he going to continue that as well so
Yes.
people could see that? Okay. Is the
Yep.
other
Yep.
one
You
you
can go to the.
mentioned, is it
Go
more
ahead.
real time? The one that
Yeah.
you mentioned? Okay.
Yep, it
Yeah.
updates every 4 hours, and you can every entrant has their own little colored boat, and you can see exactly where we're going. You can click on the boat, and it'll tell you like what my average speed was, how many miles I've done in the last 24 hours, what my heading and stuff like that. So
Okay.
you can really get an idea of what I'm experiencing out there that way. And yeah, of course, the MGR, the Mini Globe Race website is really good. He does regular live updates where he kind of talks about what everybody's experiencing, and there's all kinds of information on there. There's media where after every leg, we provide photos and videos to them, and then they make little
Okay.
movies and stuff from every entrant. You can see what life on board is like, and so yeah, it's really pretty cool.
Okay, awesome. All right. Well, hey, that GoFundMe, how do people access that? Where is that? Is that on your website? People can get to that?
Yes, if you go to my website, it's joshcayleyoceanracing.com.
Mhm.
There's a link at the top for make a donation, and
Okay.
there's a link to the GoFundMe on there, and there's also a PayPal link where you can just give money directly if you choose to go that way.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, Josh, I am so happy that we could connect. It makes it all the more sweet after the last time I was like, oh no, something's come up and I couldn't anyway. So I apologize again about that oversight. That was me forgetting about the whole daylight savings
Oh
thing.
yeah,
So
me too. Honestly, I mean, I sat down at like 2:55 and I signed in, and then I was like, oh man, I missed her, so I felt really bad. So I'm
oh
glad we actually
no,
did.
I felt really badly. So I just, yeah, I'm so grateful that you were willing to carve out this time. So thank you so very much again. I'm really honored to be able to speak with you. So yeah, so
Okay.
next time when you get an internet connection, when you're, if you want to, whenever you are up for it, let me know because I'd love to keep chatting and filling people in on your adventures. It would be amazing to do that.
All right. Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate the you taking an interest in what we're doing,
Yeah.
and I appreciate the support.
Okay, sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much again, Josh. And
All
fair
right.
winds
Take
to you.
care.
I'll be looking
Okay.
forward to watching your journey along the next route leg.
All right.
All right.
All right. Thanks
Bye.
again. Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode featuring Skipper Josh Cayley. Please be sure to check out the links in the video description to learn more about how you can follow and support Josh along his MGR journey. If you are getting something out of my podcast series, please consider subscribing to this YouTube channel and stop by for a visit on my website at passagesfromtheheart.wordpress.com. Until next time, fair winds.